It is January 3rd, 2025, the first podcast day in a brand new Roman year. You have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is Wallace Smith, and regrettably, my co-host is not here today. It is just me, but not really just me, because based on some feedback I just got from someone at the Kansas City Family Weekend, we decided to have an interview for this session. And so joining me in the podcast room / Mr. John Robinson's office is the manager of digital media, Mr. Mike DeSimone. Mr. DeSimone, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, it's very good to have you here. So Mr. DeSimone is with us today because I do appreciate the feedback we got. We'll talk about that a little bit after the music. But among the suggestions I got was that our teens and young adults could really use some career help in terms of some of the basics. How do you interview for a job? How do you actually keep a job? I was hearing from some. Well, I'll explain more details later. But regardless, it's not just good life experience. There's also some biblical principles to keep in mind. So it seemed like something well suited for biblical thinking. So after we hear from Jake and Julia, we're going to jump on it. Thank you, Jake and Julia, as always. So I did go to the Kansas City Family Weekend. And before that, by the way, I should say, the Charlotte Family Weekend, I'm not sure if we had much time to talk about it. It went really well. And Mr. DeSimone, you and I got to do something together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Before the, how would you describe what that was?
And maybe it wasn't really an interview, just a moderator, and then of course you and Mr. McNair answering questions that were somewhat, we might call them kind of difficult questions, or questions that require judgment and thought, and something that it's hard to give a solid answer for, that you all tried to.
They weren't really difficult scripture questions.
Right,
they were like
correct.
life questions,
Yes.
like when you have a coworker who's a homosexual and
That's
wants
right.
you to come to their wedding or something like
how
that.
to handle that, how to engage with them.
I really enjoyed that. I think you did too.
Yeah.
It looked like
Yeah.
you did.
Oh, we had a good
You
time.
faked it really well. It looked like
we had
you
a
did.
great time.
Okay,
I think everyone else did as well.
It was nice. It was sort of off the cuff, and I really enjoyed that. But the Kansas City Family Weekend also went really well. For any of you guys who happen to be listening to the podcast this week and were a part of that or a part of putting it together, my wife and I felt so warm and welcome. I know it's old stomping grounds. For your family at least, Mr. Your brother, Mr. Tom DeSimone was there. Was wonderful as the DJ that night. Did a great job. And we just had a blast. We really enjoy getting to see old friends and spend time in that area, and getting to make new friends as well. A lot of people there that we had not met before, and we had a wonderful time. But among the things, Mr. DeSimone, that came up was, I should mention, I do think your brother made this. One of the things they did at the Kansas City Family Weekend was, you might know out there the game Operation.
Yes, yeah.
Guy has a guy lying on a table with a big light bulb as a nose, and you got little tweezers, and you're trying to get out all these goofy things. Well, I think your brother made it.
He made it. He told me about it.
It was a life-size operation table.
He sent me a video, and I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. But he didn't tell me he had made it. But then later he told me he made the thing and put. There was a lot of technical details that went into it, and how the thing vibrated in your hand or something. The tweezers or whatever.
Maybe it did vibrate. It definitely did connect. So if you play the game Operation, you've got to carefully get these really goofy things like butterfly in the stomach. It's got like a little butterfly thing, and you've got to use your tweezers and pull it out. And if you accidentally touch the sides of the hole, then it makes a buzzer sound, and the big red light bulb on the guy's nose goes off. It's kind of morbid when you think about it, but regardless. He made it's life size, and so instead of the tweezers, they were like big salad tongs,
right?
But they were metal,
yeah.
And so he had a wire connecting them to the thing, and all the different pieces. It was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. My wife and I were two of the top scorers with another couple up until the very end, and then a team came and actually there was one we could not get in the time, and then someone came and did get all of them. They were a fantastic team. But yeah, that was a hoot. He did a great job with that, and so many of the games, sumo wrestling, other things. It was a lot of fun. But also while I was there, let's see, I don't know, Mr. David Hilgenberg, he would be your brother's brother-in-law.
He is my, I say we're related. He is my brother's wife's sister's husband.
There you go. Suddenly it's like ancient medieval, lineages and such. But it was wonderful talking to him. I used to love being in the area with them, and that might have actually been the most we've had the chance to talk one-on-one. But hey, if you're listening out there, Mr. Hilger Berkshire, I appreciate that. But he had talked about his experience. Working with a bank, right, and young people coming in, and the kind of skills that are needed. Now they're just not quite there anymore, and they used to be taught more explicitly. And he thought it would be a good topic for the podcast. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, there are not only biblical principles that apply, but also Mr. DeSimone, it is my understanding that not only have you experienced with such things for the church, but you were a hiring and firing kind of guy before you came here, right? In terms of your life's work with the air conditioning industry and some of that, right? You do have some tales of people you have, You have resumes you have accepted, resumes you may have wanted to set on fire.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So I thought, actually, I credit my wife too. We were talking about it. She said, "Oh, you ought to get Mr. DeSimone." And for the record, everyone listening, because Mr. DeSimone is the father of my daughter-in-law, I am going to treat him so much nicer than we do our normal guests that we completely mistreat terribly.
And because you're the father of my son-in-law, I'll do the same.
Okay, I think that's a good arrangement. All right, well, let's jump right into it in terms of, I don't know, because I should highlight, just like Mr. DeSimone does everything, I mentioned who I wanted to talk about, and he has got his points all laid out. This is actually more organized than even what Mr. Robinson and I tend to put together. I really appreciate it. We need you more often working with our things. So I thought I could just kind of open the floor, but what I was hoping to talk about, Mr. DeSimone, were things concerning, say, all the way from the job interview. Because there are skills there, right? You don't just walk in because you want a job, and I have at least some examples I'm aware of that didn't go well in terms of interviews. But then, okay, that's fine. So you get the job, but then it's a matter of how you conduct yourself on the job, how you keep a job, the mindset you take into it. Honestly, why don't I just give you the floor, and how would you like to start off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is a great topic. To me, it's been a fun topic for years. I don't know really what triggered it, years ago. I think maybe 18, 19, or even 16, working at Burger King, and, you just loving working there and just having a good time. And, I remember having to decide to love to do whatever it is, and maybe we'll get into some of that.
Okay, I hope
today.
So, because that sounds interesting.
Yeah,
right.
Because no matter where you're at, there's going to be troubles and all of that. You have to decide to love what you do.
Yeah, because a lot of people, sometimes they talk about their jobs and they just feel like they're at the mercy of their job, and their and what's external to them determines their attitudes and their thoughts and their joy.
No, you cannot let that happen. Yeah. But I don't want to get sidetracked too much with that one point right now, but just maybe starting out some thoughts that we can delve into, maybe a few different points.
Sounds good.
I mean, first of all, thinking about goals, and I'm just maybe give a high level overview of some things.
Okay,
and maybe we can go into each of these. But thinking about goals, thinking about the job finding the job search, and then the interview process, and obtaining the interview, and then negotiation in terms of your pay on the job. Later, after the job interview and after you obtain it, well, we don't need to get on those points right now, but maybe we will hopefully have time to talk about some of those points.
That sounds great. Like once you're there,
once we get there.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
That's right. We'll talk about those, but just maybe starting with the idea of goals. I know that a teenager, a younger teenager, even 19, 20, sometimes it's difficult. What do I want to do? I don't know what I want to do. That's a tough place to be. I remember being there. I mean, it's just a reality. So I think you have to look and say, okay, well, what do I want to try? You don't have to think about, in terms of thinking about these goals, okay? Setting these goals for yourself. You do not have to think about it in terms of, I must do this and I must do this the rest of my life.
Okay.
Think about it in terms of, what do I want to experiment with? What do I want to try? What might work for me?
Okay, so I'm not thinking in terms of what I want to do for the rest of my
Yeah,
life, but it's just a first job or
sure,
something. What's something I'd like to try and
sure.
do? Okay,
Yeah. If you know that you want to do something, the rest of your life, great, hit it hard and go for it.
but if you're not sure,
Yeah, well, if you're not sure, then you just think about it in terms of what might I want to try,
okay,
and maybe you'll experiment in one area, maybe you'll experiment in another area. Um, but you can get those jobs and try it and see what you like and what you don't like.
right,
And you've got to start somewhere. And the worst thing to do is to not be able to not go anywhere because you're afraid that you'll be stuck in that the rest of your life. The reality is you don't have to be stuck wherever you're at the rest of your life.
right,
And so I think that it seems sometimes that can make people freeze in those very early years. And so I think it's important to just try to figure out what you want to do or what
okay,
you want to try at
right,
least. And I would argue to write down some of these goals. A goal does not need to be something that you are stuck with the rest of your life. Again, sometimes that
right.
makes people freeze. It is a starting point. If you don't want to do it, then change the goal. It's very simple, but writing it down is powerful.
I appreciate. I want you to elaborate on writing it down and the difference it makes. But man, I appreciate you saying that because I have felt the pressure when I'm sitting down writing some goals like, okay, where do I want to be 5 years, or something, or how much money do I want to make? Where I really feel like, oh, I'm really committing to this because I recognize you do want to thought into your goals, but at the same time, your goals are there to serve you. You're not the slave to them,
No.
and so you can. And it was life changing for me to realize, oh
Yeah.
wait, I have some flexibility. I can
Right.
actually adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's so
it took the
important.
pressure off. I
And
guess.
many people do not. It's easy for people to not think that way about goals. So I think writing down those goals with timelines on them, maybe by the end of the year I want to have a job in this area, something like that, right?
Okay.
Separately, I think another important goal is how much money you want to make. I mean, clearly you have to, okay, $1 million, I want to make $1 million. Okay, well, you have to think about where you're at and what your education level is, what your experiences are. If you have no experience and you're getting your first job, well, then think about it from that perspective.
Right.
If you're 5 years in or 10 years in, these should always be goals that you have written down for the next year or 5 years out, something like that, maybe even 10 years out.
Okay, let me ask a question about that because I know with our sons, I try to talk to them about how, I don't really care what they do as long as it's godly. I mean, don't do something ungodly, of course. Do something that's work you can be proud of. That's good work. But I did say they should have as a goal because being all men, they would be men, that you should have a goal of wanting to be able to support a family. And you can estimate about how much you need to make, but at the same time, you may not, as a first job,
Right.
meet that kind of money. And so if you're just looking for a job and you're experimenting, that's one thing. But I would think if you're going for something where you might look more long term and you're kind of considering fields, then it might be a matter of saying, well, not how much can I make immediately? Well, definitely how much time, because you have immediate needs. I mean, you have a car to put gas
Right.
in, maybe. So you definitely want to make enough to make immediate needs. But also looking long term, you also might want to consider, and what kind of tracks are there in this company? Like,
Right.
what is a future in terms of this? What would I parlay this into down the road?
Absolutely. And maybe think about an example, just very brief story. When I finished school for HVAC, I don't, in fact, it's a trade school education. It's nothing super special in that way. But I got out of school. I said, well, boy, I'm not sure if I want to do HVAC. I mean,
HVAC, for those who don't know, is okay. I know AC is air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
I know H is heating.
Mm-hmm. Ventilation.
Ventilation.
And air.
I feel like I did know that, but honestly, I'm not entirely
Right.
sure if I did. So
Yeah.
heating, ventilating, air conditioning.
Ventilation.
Okay.
And air
What did I say?
conditioning
Did I say venting?
is something. Yeah.
Like your job was like being angry and ranting.
Right.
Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Okay,
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, so that's what I was went to trade school for, and I got out. I said, I'm not sure if I want to do that, and so I got a job in what I thought was like in the range of cabinet making.
Okay.
And in fact, it was making countertops is what it was. And I wanted to try it, wanted to be able to work with those tools and experiment with it and determine if that's something I wanted to do. And, after 6 or 9 months in, I evaluated, okay, how much do I like this? I mean, it's literally what I was talking about earlier.
Well, you just said, yeah.
You don't have to be stuck. You try, you experiment, you say, at some point you need to make a decision and move on with life. But 6 months in, I said, well, all right, what's the pay going to be, the potential pay, like what you were just talking about? What's the potential pay? And the potential pay in that industry was just a bit higher than the starting pay in the HVAC industry, at least the area that I was getting involved in. And I said, well, I don't want to work the rest of my life and do that, and with that company or whatever it was. I'm sure there might be other opportunities that I could have explored, but that was the reality for me at the time.
Looking at your projections going forward,
yeah.
Right?
And so I said, all right, well, I've got this education. Let me give this a shot. So I did, and then decided to love it, and did love it. And just by saying decided to love it didn't mean I didn't love it. I always loved it. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time doing that. But thinking about what that potential is for your future, so that you can eventually support a family and take care in that way. Well, how about this? Well, I was going to mention, I want to get to the job search and interview, kind of thinking about that, just to make sure there's time on that, because I think those goals are critical, like we talked about. You must start with those goals. And then thinking about the job search.
Okay.
The job search, a lot of times it seems what's easy to do to put out applications, just mass number of applications to different places. Hey, look, maybe we're talking about, everybody's in different situations.
Right.
Sometimes somebody wants to get a job, a part-time job. Sometimes you want to get a job that's going to end up being your career.
Right.
So, whatever your situation is, you have to think about how it applies to you.
Okay.
So not every detail that we may talk about fits exactly. You just you have to think about how it might fit for your situation.
Right.
But one scripture that comes to mind, Proverbs 21, verse 5, it says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty." And the idea with that and regarding that job search and that interview is to prepare, to think about this, not just to put out the applications and hope somebody gets back with you, but rather do it in a controlled way. Think about what company or companies do you want to work for. It's not just, and I would argue this even frankly for a part-time job that you want to get. I think about the kids, my kids, they've worked at Publix and
the grocery store chain.
The grocery store chain, yeah. And they love working there. It's a really professional company, very high quality, great standards and so forth. So it's been great. But think about where you want to go, maybe the top 3 or 4 companies that you want to work for. And then there's a process to execute. And I've suggested this to others in the past. And there's a story that in terms of I went through with an employee once who had done something like this, and it kind of separates you. The idea is you don't want to be one of the 100 other applicants that apply to that for that job. Yes.
What you're describing, it does call to mind, because I know when Jonathan was doing a lot of job hunting, some time ago, you kind of get on things like Monster.com, what all
Right.
Indeed, or these different
Yeah.
kinds of things, and they're just emailing him tons of
Hmm.
things, and it really is just like you're just part of a machine.
Yeah.
And then you realize, well, you're part of a machine. All the other people are
Yep.
applying are part of a machine,
Right.
and there's no way you really
Yeah.
distinguish yourself
Right.
all that well. So that's kind of what you're talking about. Is
That's
you don't, if you can
absolutely it.
avoid it, you don't want to just be part of the mass.
Yes.
Okay,
Figure
interesting.
out, and we'll talk about some keys to separate yourself,
Right.
and to get out of that mass of people that are all the same to the employer.
Right.
And you want to separate yourself and ideally rise above all of that and not waste your time. It's a lot of wasted time putting out a bunch of applications, and then you're leaving it up. There's more left up to. If you put out 100 applications, nobody has listed out the top 100 companies that I want to work for. Right? No,
Right.
you list out the top 3 or 4, maybe 5 companies you want to work for. Of course, thinking about your skill set, your education,
sure.
all that type of thing, your experiences. But you list that out, and those are what you're seeking out. It's not whatever company of the 100, that you happen to be the best in the 100 applications or resumes that they're looking at. And so not leaving it up to, accident or happenstance or whatever. And by doing that, I'm not saying that you have absolute total control.
Of course.
I would argue that all of this is done with prayer. All of this is done with asking God's guidance and help and getting counsel from others and that type of thing.
Well, that should be part of our comfort, is knowing that we're not looking for a job alone. I want to make it the same thing as a marriage, but kind of like in looking for a spouse, you want God to be a part of that,
Yeah.
right? I remember in our prayers for some of our sons looking for work, that was one of the things that we would ask for, which I hope they would ask for, which is to help them find companies that they would serve well,
Right.
companies that they would truly bring value to. And I don't know, maybe some out there might think, well, but it's not a very spiritual thing. It has to do with, my money or my job, and maybe I shouldn't pray about it. It's like, well, that's ridiculous. Of course you should pray about it. It's some
Yes.
facet of your life.
A major facet of
a
your life.
major facet
Yeah.
of your life. You're going to be spending, say, 8 hours a day,
Yes.
5 days a week or so on this job. If you don't think God has an opinion or desires for you in that would be a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
Of course he does, just like your physical parents would.
All of this involves God's guidance and prayer. I mean, otherwise, it could be a terrible situation.
Right.
So first, identify the companies that you want to work for.
All right.
Not the 100 and hoping to get a job.
Okay, got it.
I'm not saying that this will work 100% of the time, but
Right.
if you use this principle on the top 3 or 4 you want to work for, and something doesn't work with one of those top 3 or 4, identify the next 2 or 3
All
that
right.
you want.
Got it.
Okay, so you controlling what you want to do. All right, next would be figuring out who the hiring managers are. You mentioned, Monster and Indeed, and all of that's, those are fine to use for sure, but figuring out who the actual person who will make the decision on the hire is. That can be challenging sometimes when it is, when your engagement is largely with Monster or Indeed.
Right. So much has been turned into just a giant faceless internet portal.
Yeah. So this requires resourcefulness. You think about the 7 laws of success, this requires resourcefulness. Identifying, researching the companies that you want to work for, identifying who works there, doing the research, figuring out who of what department that you want to work for. Find out. This is difficult, but this is about controlling moving forward. I mean, simple example. I think Publix. One of the things I had. For oldest one, actually, your daughter-in-law.
The one that we have taken into our family.
That's right.
We have captured. That's right.
We talked about these things. I had her go into the store. Identify there were pictures. This is for Publix, so maybe a little bit easier. It was a part-time job and so forth, but still something she's still working at and doing well at. Going in, there are pictures on the walls of who, different managers.
Oh yeah, I've seen
general
that.
manager.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a common thing. Figure out who the person is, so you can then write them a letter. So basically, one of the first steps is to write an introduction letter to a hiring manager.
Okay.
So again, whether it's a simpler job like that, or I say simpler, maybe a part-time or job like that, or a career job, whatever you're looking for. These top 3 companies. This is you choosing what you want to do with God's guidance and direction. Identify the hiring manager. Write an introduction letter. What is an introduction letter? Well, it would include just maybe a half a page or so. That's all it is. Not
not a long letter.
Not
right.
a long letter. Half a page. It says who you are, your name, and so forth. Why you want to work there for them, and that you'll be sending a resume. So think about this. These people are getting stacks of applications and resumes.
Right. Maybe print it off from Indeed.com or whatever.
They've
right.
got them literally. Who knows? Maybe they don't have them on a stack. Maybe they printed them off. Maybe they didn't. I always found that it was easier to print them off, make notes on the, and that type of thing when I would review resumes. And so they've got a stack. I would have literally a stack, maybe 2 inches, maybe, whatever, inch to 2 inches high, right?
That's a lot of paper.
It is. And that's a lot of applicants.
Right.
And not condensed, but, kind of whatever. You understand what I'm saying. And
so is it more 1 3/4 inches, Mr. DeSimone?
Let's get into the details of that. So this introduction letter, instantly, it's like brand recognition.
It helps someone notice your name versus the other 99
Yes.
or something. Right.
It now, your name is distinguished from all of the other 99. And not that they're going to hire because of that.
Of course.
But
right.
guess who's of the 100 that they're, without helping it, who they're going to pay attention to just a little bit more. And then you send that cover letter and resume, or put in an application along with a resume, and follow up with a phone call, or you could write a handwritten letter. In fact, what Isabel had done, my guidance and counseling was write a handwritten letter to that hiring manager, bring that into the store, hand the letter to the hiring manager, shake the hand, say, thank you, I've submitted a resume or an application, and I would look forward to an interview if that would be possible. Okay. A stack of 100 resumes.
Right.
You have separated yourself through an introduction letter that now at least they pay attention to that one resume. That's yours. A phone call, follow-up phone call, or a handwritten letter. And they cannot help but notice your resume. There's a development, there's been some development of trust through this process.
Right.
There's a connection that they have with you now that they do not have with the other 99. And if there's someone else out there doing this, guess who they're going to pay attention to?
Right.
They're going to pay attention to that person.
Right.
And if there is someone else and you've done this, well, now there's only 2 people, out of the 100.
Well, and some might think, I don't know, all that sounds sort of forward. But at the same time, I think part of what you're talking about, at least to me, harkens back to a time. I like to say the word "harken" every once in a while, Mr. DeSimone. Harkens back to a time when this was more how things were done. We've been trained to think of ourselves as mindless numbers by systems that have grown to just turn us into mindless numbers because it's more convenient for other people. And yet at the same time, this was back in the days, you would say having moxie, have a little bit of moxie. I used to think moxie was a great word, and then they named a soda after it way back when. But actually, apparently the word came from the soda because marketing efforts. But anyway, having a little bit of moxie. And there's something I would say scriptural to that. In Proverbs, it actually says, the righteous are bold as a lion.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean being not bold is a sin. It's not saying that. But if you know you're doing the right thing, unlike, actually it's in Proverbs 28 and verse 1, it says the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. You're not doing anything wrong here. Know you're actually trying to, God loves it when we are productive. You are trying to find a job. You feel that you're not trying to pull one over on the guy.
No.
You think that you could work in this grocery store, this food chain, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And so you're just trying to go about it in the best way possible to have that position.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, and it's the kind of thing that used to be more consciously celebrated. And if you think about it, you're also giving them an opportunity to evaluate you. It could be that maybe they're not looking for how you come across. I was trying to when I talk with Mr. Weston, I try to be as transparent as possible, because if there's anything he needs to address in something I've said or whatever, I need him to know. I need him to see it. Well, you are putting your best foot forward. You're not trying to fool the person you're talking with. You're simply presenting this is me, and I would like this position. Think of it all the more as giving them that much more opportunity to evaluate you more than a piece of paper. I've helped many people put their resumes together, and part of the struggle is, how do you communicate who this person is on a resume?
Right.
A resume they're not just going to throw aside because it's too wordy or it's too much. Well, this is part of how you do that.
Yeah, everybody's resume, looks the same, sounds the same. It's all the best about that person. You don't know what to trust in it, that type of thing, oftentimes.
And you can make it stand out by using construction paper and crayons, but you're not going to stand out in a good way.
So you mentioned, whether we're talking about the grocery store example, but certainly a career, I think, is even more important. Just
well, there, if you are looking for a future,
I had a situation where I was in the process of hiring someone, and I had gotten several resumes, and again, a stack of them,
1 7/8 inches tall.
Right. And I had a process that I would go through. I had 3 piles. One was definitely want to move on this person.
Okay.
In other words, I would like to hire this person, or at least I want to interview this person.
This person has a lot of potential.
Yes.
I want to look at them further.
Yes.
Okay.
The other pile was, if the first pile doesn't work out.
Okay. Plan B pile?
Plan B. And then the third pile was down on the floor in a round bucket.
The file 13, we used to call it. Yeah, the trash can. Okay.
And, as I would go through it, I learned to become very quick to use file 13, the trash can.
Just, you have to, right?
Yeah. Don't care. Don't want to know. Don't care about the story. None of that. Don't want to hear the story. Don't have time for the story in terms of their story as to why their resume looks this way.
Right.
And
you got another 1.5 inches of resumes to get through, right? You got to get through it, right?
Yeah. And so that's the way that worked. So I had this one person who called me, said, "Hey, I wanted to make sure you got my resume." I said, "No, let me see. I don't see it in my piles." And I said, "But you sound like your name sounds familiar, And he said, "Well, could you look again? I just want to make sure that you receive my resume, because I'd really like to work with you." And so I look again, it's not there. I said, "Well, let me look in the trash can." And I told the guy, that I found it in the trash can,
Mm-hmm.
and I told him I had actually thrown out his resume.
You let him know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he asked me why, and I told him why, and so he told me his story as to why I should still consider him, and I hired him.
Wow.
And so the point is,
trash can
from
to
the
a
trash
job.
can.
That's what he'll title his
Yeah.
autobiography.
And he was a smart guy. He was a diligent worker. And I did end up having to drop him off in terms of let him go because of kind of what I saw in the resume.
So the things you saw actually did end up bearing the kind of fruit, which is why he was in the trash can.
But the fact that he was able to separate himself by that phone call and get on the phone and talk with me, and I made a decision based on that. I learned not to do that again necessarily, but it made a big difference there. And so, had that been one on the actual on my desk,
right?
Then I may not even spend time interviewing others, possibly.
Right. If he hadn't had those problems, if he'd have been one of the other guys, then he would have had a job and possibly kept it.
Yeah. So, okay. So then the interview.
Okay. So we have an opportunity for an interview.
Yeah.
Now, what comes into play?
All right. So with the interview, first thing is don't wing it. And what do I mean by that? Okay. So you now have...
You just condemned most of my life. But for an interview, for the sake of an interview, you got it.
All right. You have identified the top 3 or 4 companies that you're interested in. You have gone through the process to separate yourself to get the interview ultimately, and now there must be preparation for the interview. And I think maybe some of this is common sense, though it's easy to miss some of these things.
Yeah, and that's why the topic was encouraged upon me, is because I think we've taken for granted that some things are common sense,
right.
And it really is helpful to go over them.
Yeah. So here's what I would suggest, and that is actually identify questions that you'll be likely asked in an interview. You can Google them. They're often pretty common questions. You should definitely do your research on the company that you're going to be interviewing with.
Like if you're going to interview with company XYZ, actually look up XYZ.
Look them up.
See
know
some things
their
about
history.
Them. Okay.
Read their earnings reports. Just understand what's happening. In terms of if depending on whatever company you're getting with. Know everything you can, and then have someone role play with. And role play, I mean that person acts as the interviewer and you act as the interviewee. They ask you questions that you would expect in any interview, and you refine your answers to be able to comfortably answer those questions. Not scripted.
Right.
Not kind of, written on your hand and you're looking down at your hand and, kind of word for word and forget what you say. None of that stuff. But you're not going into that interview answering these questions for the first time. You have already been asked these questions dozens of times.
That reminds me of advice I used to give for certain educational circumstances. One, your role play, that could be your father if he has some experience. It could even be a member of the congregation.
I've done it with all my kids.
There you go. See, I don't know if I've actually done that with my kids. I should have. That's why they're all unemployed. And I'm just kidding. They have jobs.
Yes.
But I used to say the same thing academically, and when I was taking actuarial exams, the same way. When I was talking to my students, I said the day you take the test should not be the first time you take the test. You should practice your test in test-like conditions so that by the time you're sitting for the real test, it feels like old hat. It feels like, okay, I'm sitting down once again to answer questions about this. Yeah. So you shouldn't go into that test as if it's the first time.
Right.
And kind of what you're saying is that by the time you're doing this interview, You've already kind of practiced it a bit. You've
Yeah.
already been through this. You're getting used to. Someone suggested, I don't know if you know anything about this, but they suggested being able to use things like ChatGPT, et cetera, AI, and telling it to play the role of interviewer
Well,
for some
that would
kind
be
of
one of
job.
the things
That
you
would
would
be
do.
one thing
Yeah.
you could give a shot
What
to.
kind of questions? This type
Yeah,
of thing.
and then
you could converse with
and
it
these
too, I
days they
suppose.
can
Yeah.
actually converse with you.
Yeah.
But I would encourage talking to your dad
Yep.
or someone in the congregation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Mr. DeSimone's available for appointments, but he's a busy guy. But yeah, definitely somebody in your life.
Right.
So okay, so it's not your first time in a sense.
Yes, you're
All right.
going in. It is not your first time. You feel comfortable with that. Maybe it's possible can be an awkwardness with that. Maybe the first times you do it, or because I don't know, it's not necessarily a normal thing oftentimes, but I would argue that it should be.
Right.
And I mean, you go. I remember, um, working in certain just different law offices in Atlanta when I was down there, and I don't know, it was the first time I was younger, and they had what they called war rooms, right? It was
Really?
just a room that was meant to. There was even one place where they had inside of the law office they had a mock
Courtroom? Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And it was about them winning the case.
Mm.
And I mean, it's very. I understand it's a very common thing. They'll go through. They'll work with maybe the witnesses or work with whoever they're working
Right.
with, and the lawyers will be tested and pushed. All these people are on the same team, but they're being tested from different angles, learning how to respond to these different things. And so it's a very real thing, and it will separate you completely. So we're talking about setting up for life, doing some of these things.
Yeah.
All right. Next, after working out that, go ahead, Mr. Smith.
No, I was going to make a recommendation when it comes time for the actual interview, should you be bold, and the first thing you say is, if I'm not going to be paid $30,000 a year, I don't even want to waste my time in this room. Is that do you?
Well, no, of course, no, yeah. But one thing you should know when you go in, is what's the range, on this
Like
job.
what to expect for this. Okay.
What's the range? And there's always a range of what to expect. And if you don't want the job, then you go in saying, "Hey, I'm only going to get this much money."
No, but I've heard before for negotiating purposes that at least way back when I was first interviewing, this was someone's. It was stated dramatically, but that the first person to state money loses. That's what they would say. But I don't know if that's exactly right or not. But that's what I have heard.
Okay. Well, my argument would be to don't be the first one to state the number.
Okay.
Because if you understand the range,
you've already decided. It seems like it's a worthwhile range.
Right.
That's why you're interviewing.
Yes,
right?
that's right. And if you were to have to do that, then you should, frankly, always start on the top of that range, maybe even above the range, because whoever states first, let's say, for example, well, first of all, before you get to negotiation,
Okay.
it should be avoided at all costs until they have expressed that they want you to work for them.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yes, because there is plenty of room for negotiation in any job. And if when they want you, at that point, they have been through the other interviews. They have looked at their other options. And there's not many maybe wise employers, or maybe any employers, who would not want to pay a little bit more for the one they want and one they know is going to, after their process.
Sure.
They're willing to pay a little bit more for that. And so you want to be in that position. That's your best negotiation leverage position.
Okay.
And so then ideally, they'll often ask you about, how much you're making where you're at. That's something that you should politely decline to communicate to them. It's not something that they need to know. They want to know it because that's their leverage point.
Right.
And they don't need to know that. They should understand that they don't need to know that. This is not an offense toward them at all.
Right.
This is just the reality of how things need to be.
Right. Now, as we're talking here, and this isn't necessarily something on your notes, but it is something that I'm reminded of when this was suggested as a topic. And what was mentioned as a topic was that one reason it would be profitable to talk about this with our younger listeners is that even some of the most commonsensical things are not they're not present as skills. For instance, interviewing for a job, and a guy. Now, this would not generally be most young people in our church. A guy comes in, tatted up to the shoulders, piercings everywhere in his face and fingertips. I have no idea, but everywhere. Didn't put any thought into how he's dressed. Just kind of showed up. And even in some of those basics, what would you recommend? I've heard some worrying about overdressing for an interview. For those that do worry about that, or definitely for underdressing, but in terms of some of the most fundamental things, what are some things you would recommend?
Yeah. Well, first thought is, we're not going to be covering every detail about an interview. So you should be researching details like this.
So do look online. In other words, even that you're saying, go look online to see good advice.
These things are some things that I think would be less prominent when you're looking up how to, what to do for an interview.
Okay.
The things that I'm highlighting here, but this point about dress and presentation, at least one of the principles that I have. I can't remember where I read it somewhere, and I feel like it was very balanced, and that is you should dress one step above, let's say, okay, if everybody were wearing suits and ties, you would not go in a tuxedo, okay? You would go in a suit and tie, okay? If the job position were, it's okay to wear, shorts and a t-shirt, well, you should go in maybe dressy casual.
Right.
If the job position were dressy casual, you probably should go in maybe with a tie.
Okay.
Basically, kind of maybe one step above. I don't maybe know the best way to explain that, but
I can see that as an approach that hedges your bets against underdressing.
Yeah.
If you're always aiming a little bit higher,
that's right.
Then you're certainly hedging it as I'm not going to underdress for the interview.
That's right.
So, okay.
Yeah, and certainly, bathe and smell good.
Well, again, it may not be taken for granted. Part of that, I think, is our culture, though. We increasingly have a culture where people seem to think that dress doesn't make a difference, that it doesn't. And every once in a while, you get someone who even wants to come to church, and they just feel like, why should I dress up? And yet, it is biblical that the way we present ourselves is a reflection of the esteem that we give.
Right.
We're giving those to whom we are presenting ourselves. Jesus Christ had the parable with the wedding supper.
Wedding supper.
And just they talk about the guy being thrown out because he wasn't dressed appropriately for a wedding. Our outer clothes, boy, I won't mention the movie, maybe some other time, but there's one worthwhile principle in this one movie a long time ago where the guy was saying that when it comes to manners, how you dress, etc., all of those are fundamentally, we think of them in our culture as it's how I express myself. But fundamentally, because everyone else who's looking at you all day, it tells other people what you think of them. that is, I thought you were worth dressing up for. I thought this opportunity is worth dressing up for versus your family.
Right.
I'm just going to dress
Yeah,
laid back.
I'm not, or I'm not going to change for anybody. I'm not going to, yeah, okay, well, that communicates how you're going to be as an employee in that case.
Right.
Too.
I'm not going to rise to meet your standards. I expect you to accept me for my standards,
Right.
which that tells me
this is who I am, right?
But you're coming to a job I want to train you for. I hope to give you skills you don't currently have, and the rest I'm expecting you to.
Yeah.
So even those kind of basic ideas kind of culturally becoming strange for people. Yeah. But at the same time, just your basic idea there, take the time to teach yourself, right? Take the time. I mean, you don't have to just listen to these incredibly wise and handsome men on a podcast. You can go online.
Good thing they can't see us. That's good.
But you can Google a good interview practices, right? And let me just use that in terms of a transition. Let's say, okay, the interview goes really well, because I do want to get to the other things that you've got to talk about. It really, does education stop then? I looking ahead in your notes and cheating a little bit, I see that you talk about, like, after you get the job, there's still more work to do, right? Really? Is there? All right. Like what? It's like, oh no, I got it. I crossed the finish line and now it's just celebration, but no, there's more to do, right?
Yeah. So, Proverbs 18 verse 15, the heart of a prudent man acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. I must have been 20, maybe I was 21 years old.
Okay.
And a man who I respected, that he was doing very well for himself in life. He told me, you should read every day about the career that you work in. And I'll tell you, we were at dinner at an Italian restaurant with this gentleman and his wife, and from that day forward, I got out the manual. It was the manual that our industry used, and I would get to work at, half an hour early, and sit in my truck and read the manual. And it was very, I didn't understand it at first, but as I worked on different jobs, I said, oh yeah, I read about this type of thing. And then I started, as I'd run across new things on the job, I would go to the manual and look that up and read about it. But I still do that to this day. I've got a book on my desk. I've always got a book on my desk, and
I've seen that.
I will read that. Yeah, I will read that book in the morning. I may not do it every single day, but it is always there. I'm always moving through a book that will help in whatever area that I'm working in. And I think that is so critical to do, and it makes all the difference. Another thing is Spokesman Club. I think that's a part of educating yourself. If the opportunity presents itself and you're a young man, you can join Spokesman Club. That will make a big difference.
So let me jump on that. So what you're recommending to our young listeners is that, once Spokesman Club becomes an option for them, it really is valuable. And you might think, well, I don't really talk to other people in my work. I don't do presentations in my work. But I would say, and I suspect this is what you're saying, Spokesman Club really is so much more beyond that. It's just having a confidence in terms of how you present yourself, even when you're talking to your boss, even when you're talking to coworkers, or eventually potentially people who work with you or under you. That Spokesman Club isn't just about how to get up and make a 6-minute or whatever speech. It really is about how you carry yourself
how to organize your thoughts.
Organizing your thoughts.
Yes. It made all the difference in my life. I mean, Spokesman Club definitely helped in my life for sure. And I know it's helped in many, many people's lives in that way. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So now we're continuing to talk about, you've got the job.
Yeah.
Mindset, right? What do you recommend as a mindset on the job?
Yeah. So one scripture that actually comes to mind, I think it's really, all encompassing in a certain way regarding your job, and that is Colossians 3 and verse 22. through 24. I'm just going to read the thing because
Okay.
it's very helpful to me. It always has been. It kind of touches on Ecclesiastes 9. We often think about that, right? Whatever your
Sure.
hand finds to do, do it with your might.
Right. That's kind of a go-to verse when it comes to attitude and working hard, right?
Right.
But you're suggesting this other verse as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colossians?
Colossians 3:22, bondservants, or you might think of employees,
Sure.
obey in all things your masters or your employer, your boss, according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers. Don't just do it because the boss might see me, right?
I want the boss to see me
Yeah.
working hard.
Oh yeah. As soon as he leaves, you kind of take a break. No, 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 no. Work hard all the time, but do it. I'm sorry, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. You're doing it really not knowing that God is watching. And whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. So not just doing things to please men, but to do it because there's a far greater purpose. Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. And so to me, I think that helps encapsulate. What would it encapsulate? Well, every aspect of what you do for your job, in your job. But I think about hustling,
Mm.
hustle. And I say that, I mean, get it done. Don't walk from point A to point B like like you don't care about life. Walk and,
With
hustle
purpose.
with purpose. Yes. Make it happen. Figure out how to do it. There are always problems. Don't bring problems to your boss. Bring solutions to problems. Don't just go with problems. That sounds like complaining. Go with solutions. Have thought it through already. Just generally speaking, work hard. I think if just simply obeying God's laws is another aspect of this. Just obeying the laws of God, you will instantaneously separate yourself again from many others who aren't obeying God's laws, and that might include stealing. In terms of are you you're getting paid for 8 hours a day, let's say. Are you giving 8 hours worth of work? Or did you spend time talking about things not related to work for an hour of that time? And if you did, work the extra hour or learn to not talk for an hour, during the 8 hours about
Right.
things that have nothing to do with the work that you're doing. I think those are some principles. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You've intrigued me with this last note here on your list, where it says think like your boss.
Yeah.
I am intrigued. What do you mean by that?
Well, as I suppose this particular idea for me, it took it took a while to get or to think about, but you don't want your boss to always have to tell you what to do.
Okay.
Try to understand their goals, their objectives, what they want to accomplish, the way they want it done. And then make that your goal, make that your objective. Ideally, they do not need to come to you and say, hey, I'd like for you to do this differently, or hey, I wanted to remind you again about X, right? Proverbs 26 verse 3 says, a whip for the horses, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. It's this idea that you must always have your boss
driving you and directing you.
No, you need to have that drive. You need to figure out what the boss wants, and execute on that. It is a different mindset.
Yeah.
Different mindset.
Mr. Robinson and I talk about the Jocko podcast every once in a while. And one of the with his SEAL experience, he gives such good advice in terms of business and work, and his book on and his principle on extreme ownership,
Mm-hmm.
where you
Yes.
you don't make excuses, you don't
Right.
kind of think of you take complete ownership of your project. But among the things he talks about is really understanding what your boss wants.
Yes.
In fact, once I know it's an anecdote. I can't at this point. I don't know if I've heard it myself or if Mr. Robinson told me about it, but where he'll do Q&A, with people. And someone called in and said, "Man, my boss is always taking credit for my work. He's always doing this and that. And what do I do?" And he said, "You make your boss look as good as
Yeah.
possible. You just double down and you
That's
do
right.
the work and you don't complain."
That's
He
right.
says, and it's so anti to hear a worldly source
Yeah.
recognize the wisdom of that.
Mhm.
Kind of harkening back to your previous verse about recognize, if you're working for God,
Mhm.
then yeah, you're obeying your master, in this case, your boss, but you're doing it as if you work for God. And so
Right.
you do best. You make him look, if anything, that guy's going to know, okay, I may never give him any credit, but he's the most valuable guy I've
Oh
got.
yeah.
He's going to recognize this
Oh
guy
yeah.
is making me look
Yeah.
really good. But it's also then a matter of knowing what he wants. I remember talking to
Right.
poor Thomas White and William Williams, who worked for me here in the department, and telling them that, "Man, I'm really sorry, but part of y'all's jobs is to try to read my mind.
That's
That
right.
really is
Yep.
part of what
You're
you have
right.
to learn to do."
No, I
And
think
and
it's
I like the
legit.
proverb you've cited, because it really, all those are pictures of someone trying to get an animal to do what they want. Whipping the
Mhm.
horse, putting a bridle on a donkey,
Yep.
and then and why? Because a horse, it doesn't want to go faster,
Yep.
and you're having to make it go faster. But the fool, that's what he's saying. If you need a rod on
Mhm.
your back to
Mhm.
do what the guy needs you to do, then you're a fool.
Yeah.
The wise man has insight, who actually is trying to figure out what his boss wants.
That's right.
That reminds me of the Jesus Christ talking about, the profitable servant, the unprofitable servant, the one that just does all the things that are commanded of
Right.
him. I've often tried to think of that servant as thinking, well, if he's a profitable servant, that means he's going above and beyond. He's trying to think, well, what is my master's schedule like tomorrow? He hasn't commanded me to shine his shoes, but I know he's going to be going to that business meeting, and so I know he's going to need his shoes to look good. And so you're not waiting to be commanded; you're actually looking ahead of the things. And I think I wouldn't have thought of that principle here necessarily, but I appreciate you highlighting that proverb.
Yep.
Yeah. And so Proverbs 22 and verse 29 you have on your list, and that actually has long been one of my favorites.
Right.
Where it says, "Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men."
Right.
That encouragement that God does care about the level of work that we do, right? He does care about that we're doing a good job.
Yeah, and I think, of course, I don't think it has to mean kings in the sense of over a nation or that type of thing.
Right.
But the maybe the leadership of the company, the leadership in other companies, this type of thing. So even if you've got customers that you're dealing with, if you to be able to deal with the top people in the company,
Right.
makes all the difference in terms of sales, because the top people can direct who the who those are who are working with you, what they do, and who they hire to do that work, that type of thing.
Yeah. I do think about that. The people that they might. It's easy to think, oh, I've just got a low man on the totem pole job, and such. But if you really do work hard at that, and you start to stand out, those who are the managers, they notice who's working hard, and that, you can be surprised. Even like, say you're just working at a burger joint. Well, even the guys that come in are various vendors that are having to deal with you. Even they start to notice certain people at certain store locations are the ones that just hustle, and every
Right.
time they get there, man, their truck is always cleared faster than any other store,
Right,
and word
right.
starts to spread. And next thing you know, when they have other opportunities, they're not even part of the same store, but they remember that guy
Yeah.
and such. Hey, next time you're there, ask if he's looking for work.
Right.
But what I like about all this, it's not just, I'm going to do this so that I get better jobs. No, think about it as serving God, and you want to do your best for God. So do your best for your employer. And what's nice is these things would indicate there's natural consequences to that.
That's right.
Well, boy, I'm trying to judge if we have time. Your last thing there, I'd love to talk about what you got there, because you said it has to do with motivation for your
We
job.
can
But I
talk
know,
about real fast.
yeah, let's do it. Let's
Okay.
do it.
Just the idea of finances. Even you mentioned, is it maybe this is a tangent thing, and maybe it is in some way, but I really think it impacts how you think about your job. And there's two key things. One, putting away 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. That might sound like a lot, and maybe it is to start with, but just work on it. I mean, it's okay to take some time to get there, but get that emergency fund built up. And
When
then
you say 3 to 6 months, you're talking about like
your
the amount
expenses.
of money. So the expenses you would have in 3 to 6
Yeah.
months, having some savings set aside to be able to cover that.
Yep.
So like if you were out of a job for
That's right.
3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll get to why this makes a difference in just a minute. But the second thing is saving, just regularly learning to put away 20 to 30%, maybe even more, depending on, what this also means is learning to scale back your spending so that in your life, so that you can always put away and live on 80 to 70%. Well, we might even be talking about, if we're talking about first and second tithe as well, we might be talking about, 50% of your income, learning to live on that. And why? Well, because if you put that away and you can put that into something that produces additional money, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be anything complicated, just maybe even a good savings account, or CDs or different things that can bring money, cash flow to you from the money that you've put away and never touch the money you put away. That cash flow on top of your growing salary over the years and your growing income from the job over the years, here's where it makes the difference. That emergency fund and an additional cash flow coming to you that's not from your job, and you have learned to put this money away, and you do it every time, and you do it all the time. And that is, you do not need to feel stuck in your job. You don't go to work because you have to go to work. It opens up opportunities to say, you know what? I'd like to give this a try over here. I'd like to give this a try. You're not going to work because you must go to work because you must pay the bills, and that's a negative. It can be a negative cycle, and it is truly controllable. You don't need to be in that situation. Many people find themselves in that situation. They can't get out because they can't afford to try another job, and maybe even start at a lower salary for something that you feel like you want to try.
Right.
And so, especially starting young, it can make all the difference in terms of just the whole outlook of your job and the whole outlook of life.
I just turned the microphone off, everyone. I just turned it back on because it hit me. So many of you out there talk about how much you love our whiteboard videos. And Mr. DeSimone, maybe you saw, I don't even know if I have a title of this. You saw Mr. DeSimone was going to be on. And you might think, well, hey, all he did was talk about jobs. I want to talk about whiteboards. I would love to have him on to talk about whiteboard processes as well. And while he's here, I can get him to commit. Mr. DeSimone, would you be willing to come back on and talk about our whiteboards?
No, sure, would love to. That'd be fun.
Okay, good. Okay, good. And so the reason I did want to turn the microphone on, because I could ask him that without talking to all of you guys, but for all of you guys, what questions do you have about the whiteboards? So between now and maybe we'll even do it next week. Mr. Robinson should be in, but if he's not here next week, we'll try to do it within the next one or two or so. Feel free and ask questions. What are questions you have about the whiteboards? You can ask us, of course, at podcast@livingyouth.org. You can send us an email that way. I think you can comment on the website. I got to admit, it so rarely happens, but at livingyouth.org, you can comment on this particular post. I know you can actually comment on Spotify, but I'm just learning how to read those kinds of comments. But by all means, let us know if you have questions. And one more opportunity to, I forgot about this. Don't forget, thank you. We've had like 40 or so people volunteer for getting feedback about the podcast for reaching the world. That link is still up at the top at livingyouth.org. If you would like to give us feedback, be available for us to get feedback from concerning the podcast and reaching the world with the podcast, our younger millennials and Gen Zers, then by all means, go sign up for that and let me know that you're interested. It's at the top of the page at livingyouth.org. But hopefully sometime soon, talk about whiteboards. Okay. Thank you again, Mr. DeSimone.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Smith and Robinson.